Okay. My name's John Paul. I started Cameron Winery in 1984 in Dundee. I brought a whole bunch of different clones of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay that were originally from Burgundy, and I found them all over California in old vineyards down there and brought them north and planted my vineyard up here. And then I got to be good friends with a person that had a great vineyard site. His name was Bill Wayne, and the name of the vineyard is Abbey Ridge. So Cameron has basically been the conduit for fruit from Abbey Ridge and then our estate vineyard, which we call Clos Électrique, which means electric fence because that's what keeps the deer out of it. From the very beginning, we were dry farming, and that was an issue dear to my heart. I grew up in Arizona, basically in the Salt River Valley, and I watched them just destroying water tables there and rivers and everything else, and it was a lasting impact on my attitude about man and his use of water. And the story when I was growing up was about the Hohokam Indians who were in that valley at one point, and they disappeared. And the reason they disappeared is because the water dried up and they couldn't live there anymore. And that always kind of stuck with me, that was what was going to happen in the Salt River Valley at some point. And I still believe it probably will happen. I mean, they've taken the Colorado River there, but that's not going to save their ass in the long run. So when I got up here, still an issue close to me. And so I'm dry farming, and about late 80s, all of a sudden some vineyards up here start putting in irrigation. And when I first bailed out of academia, I was at UC Berkeley. I was a research postdoc there. And I decided to go into wine, and I drove up through the Napa Valley, and they were already starting to irrigate there, but they hadn't been for very long. This was in the mid-late 70s. And they only started irrigating there because they made it on to the wine world with this tasting in Paris. And all of a sudden, a lot of investment started coming into the Napa Valley. And so in order to protect investment, it was like, well, let's irrigate, and then we can get our vines into production quicker, and we can make bigger crops, and on and on and on. And I remember driving up the Napa Valley at the time, and the wines that put them on the map were amazing wines. It was the 1974 vintage, I believe. And they were really incredible wines, and I got to try most of them when I was a winemaker in the Napa Valley. And what happened, they were all 12.5% alcohol wines. And I remember as I was driving up the valley, and my background was plant biochemistry, and so I knew something about, just physiology of plants. And I saw this irrigation and all this leaf canopy, and I thought to myself, they're making all this leaf canopy with the irrigation, and leaf canopy is basically just a solar panel, and its product is not electricity, it's sugar. And they're going to be producing massive quantities of sugar, and I'll bet the alcohols are going to start going up on these wines. And sure enough, Napa Valley, which in the 60s and 70s, the wines were 12.5% alcohol, all of a sudden the alcohols started going up to 13, 13.5, 14, 14.5, 15. And now that's what they make. They make 15% alcohol wines with all these irrigated vines. And I get up to Oregon, and here we are again with all dry farm vines, and they're all 12.5% alcohol. And in the 90s, all of a sudden, people start putting in irrigation. And I kind of went, oh, God, here we go again. And so I decided, no, I've got to come out with a counter story to this going on. And so late 1990s, I linked up with my friend Russ Rainey at Evesham Wood, and we said, let's start a dry farming cooperative and market our wines as dry farmed. And so we came up with the name Deep Roots Coalition. At first it was a joke because Deep Roots Coalition is, the letters are DRC, which is the most famous producer in Burgundy. But we did ours with a small d, a small r, and a small c to show our humbleness. And they've never sued us, so I guess we're okay at this point. And we did it partly out of respect for them, certainly. So the Deep Roots Coalition was formed. We invited about 5 people to join with us, and all 5 of them were enthusiastic to be part of it. Beau Frere, Evesham Woods, Cameron, Brickhouse, I think Patty Green was in at the beginning. And anyway, and Irie. And so away we went. And the main reason Irie joined was because David I told him there wouldn't be any dues. So he said, okay, I'll join your organization. I said, no meetings, no dues. He said, yeah, okay, then I'll join your organization. And away we went. And we started doing these little trade tastings around Portland. And we got more wineries joining us as time was going on. And pretty soon it became like the trade tasting of the year in Portland that people were going to. And the word started getting out there more and more about dry farmed grapes and how the wines are better and the alcohols are lower. And all of a sudden it started to take off. And now we've got, I think, close to 50 people. I was surprised to hear today. And so here we are. It's working. Success is being able to actually make a living at it. I mean, any farming, that's your success, right? If you can make a living at it, then then you've been successful. And if you can dry farm and produce decent fruit off of it and make great wine and make a living at it, and you are going to produce less fruit off of a dry farm vineyard. So hopefully the quality of the fruit allows you to charge enough money for the wine that you could make a living at it. So to me, that's success. Well, first you have to get your vines into production. And when we planted Clolette Creek and Abbey Ridge Abbey Ridge in the early 70s and Clolette Creek in the early 80s, we could literally drill a hole in the ground, put a little water, put the vines in, maybe water them once during the summer, and then you were off and going. That's no longer the case. Summers are too hot and too dry, and so in order to be successful at it, you need to put some water on your vines during the summer. You need to have enough nutrition in the soil, so you need to do composting out there. You need to get really good cover crops. And so along the way, we particularly got a whole entourage of different clovers, particular subterranean clover, because that would reseed itself. And the clover would put more nitrogen into the soil. And so we had different cover crops to help us with the soil. And so, and then once you get them up the stake, at that point, you can cut adding any water to them. And they may suffer a little bit. They may stress. But once they're up the stake, the roots are deep enough that you're on your way. And you just have to be patient. It takes much longer to establish a dry farm vineyard than an irrigated vineyard. And so you can't bring it along too quickly. You just have to be patient getting it there. Yeah, so, shallow soil is really difficult. It just is. You have to kind of know somewhat about the soil profile, whether there's a place that the roots can go down. And if not, then it may not be suitable to dry farm. That's just the way it is. And so, you can't grow grapes everywhere. But, if you look at places like Cote Rôtie, which is just pure rock, in the Rhone, and they've hand dug all the holes and somehow they have vineyards there, I really feel that for the most part, you can do a dry farm vineyard anywhere, but the more difficult the soil conditions, the longer it's going to take you and the more patience it's going to take you to get the vine into production. Eventually, a grapevine can get its roots down through the soil and get to a point that it will survive on its own. But it's it's a job, and I've been helping Yuri Pobaraj up in White Salmon do a vineyard, and he's trying to do it dry farmed. And what I got him to do was first put in a little pond there so that he can irrigate for some years to get it going. And he's got really shallow, rocky soil there. Put some nutrition around the vines. And then, as I said, just be patient. And we'll get them there. It'll happen. But it's and once you get there, it's the best, because then, you know, you may have a hot, dry summer, but your vines, the roots are down deep. They're fine. Well, I, of course, didn't have water rights and I have an incredible well at Cameron Winery. I didn't have water rights, but that really wasn't what was driving me. I knew I could do a vineyard without irrigating it. And Abbey Ridge had been put in without irrigation, and so it was already being dry farmed. So the driving thing was just doing what was right and what I knew was going to make the best wine. So that was really the motivation. This has been a developing situation, and a lot of it's been influenced for a number of years. And I haven't gone recently, but I'm going to go again. I used to go to the Eco Farm Conference in Pacific Grove, and I learned a lot of cool stuff down there. And interestingly, those guys are not necessarily about dry farming, although one year John Williams from Frog's Leap Winery in the Napa Valley gave a big talk there about dry farming grapes, and this is back when everybody in the Napa Valley was turning to irrigation. So John Williams, if you see this, John Williams, you're my hero. And so he was there, but I learned about how to do proper composting. I learned about cover crops and what kinds of things to use as cover crops to put various nutrients into the soil. And so we compost all of our pressings every year from the vineyard, including the prunings from the vineyard, which we chip up, and we make an incredible compost pile. And I put compost back out into the vineyard and some up at Abbey Ridge every single year so that we build up the carbon in the soil. Because ironically, if you can build up carbon in the soil, you also increase its water holding potential. That's really important. So composting is key. And then if you have a really good cover crop and you mow it, then that also puts carbon into the soil as well as nutrition. So we mostly do no-till, but some areas, even the vineyard at Clolet Creek, I have to till in order to have enough water retention in the soil for the vines. But a good portion of the vineyard now is no-till, and the vines stress for a while, and then eventually they kind of get used to it. And so that's kind of cool. So compost, good cover crop, and then mowing that, and building up the carbon on the soil. And we literally weed eat down the vine rows between the vines to keep things down there. So it's labor intensive for sure. I think if it's as long as it's got some porosity to it. I mean, there are all different kinds of things that are dry farmed in this. You've got Ribbon Ridge, which is marine sediment, which is, kind of sticky. And then you have Jory soil like where, which is broken down basalt. That works. That's kind of volcanic clay. And I don't think you have to be hemmed in by types of soil. I'm sure, if it's sandy loam, that's going to be easier than a lot of other types of things. But I think you can dry farm anywhere. Well, again, based on what kind of cover crops are they putting, compost out there, and then the luck of the draw that you happen to have a site which is more conducive to growing stuff than another site is. Brickhouse is on a more difficult growing site overall. And yet, he's been there a long time now. He's pulled it off, and he's got a beautiful vineyard now. So again, patience. Like you see a difference in younger vineyards, But if you have the patience to hang in there, you'll get there.